has taken decisive action to spur a new era of opportunity, prosperity, and growth. Some might say that's a pretty hefty accomplishment for a president that's not been in the White House even a year yet.
Well, the economy is doing great, and I think that probably explains why, why did Bob McDonnell back in 2009 win by nearly double the margin that the Democrat won this time? It's probably because the economy is doing a lot better now. We were in a deep recession back then, so maybe the economy will be good enough. And furthermore, the thing you've got to think about in 2018 is that a lot of whether the districts that are up that'll be decisive, they might be more Trump voters. Virginia is a highly educated state, and the demographic just might be better in these decisive Senate and House races.
And as we saw the polling heading into this election last night, the economy and health care were polling #1 for the people of that state. As far as former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, he published an op-ed in The Hill yesterday. And he might agree with you somewhat on this. He says tax reform is never easy, but GOP majorities hang in the balance. He writes, Republicans must not take for granted that everyone likes tax cuts. They must fight and they must win. That victory will only be assured if the American people are with them. Furthermore, Republicans who have not come on board with the bill should consider one hard reality. Passage of this bill is critical to keeping the GOP majority in Congress. If they are able to do this, are they secure?
I still don't think they're secure. I think it probably does help. The tax bill is a little bit complicated. A lot of people are better off. A lot of middle-class families are better off. But in these high-income places like Northern Virginia, people might end up being worse off because they can't take all of the deductions that they want. So in these, suburban Hillary Clinton districts that Republicans hold now, tax reform might not help them. It could even hurt them.
Very interesting stuff as we await the Senate to roll out their plan tomorrow. Very interesting week. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Bill?
So in the meantime, now we turn our attention back to Texas. Vice President Mike Pence now heading there today with his wife to meet with the grieving community of Sutherland Springs. Survivors starting to share their stories about what they heard and what they saw inside that horrifying scene inside the church.
What else did she see while she was on the ground inside the church?
She saw the shooter after he initially stayed at the entryway and emptied, 6 or 8 clips, 30-round magazine clips, and then he proceeded to walk up and down the aisle. She said about 10, 15 times, shooting everybody that was laying on the ground.
Story gets no better. Adam Housley live in Sutherland Springs today. And Adam, what is the latest on the investigation? Let's start there.
Yeah, we'll start there. We'll also start real quickly, Bill. I'm going to mention that the vice president is coming here, as you said. We now know he's going to be meeting with families in Floresville, which is about 13 miles from here, and that he won't come to this specific site, but he'll meet with families there and take part in a candlelight vigil at about 5 o'clock local time tonight. At least that's what we've been told is the latest plan. As for the investigation, some details coming out late yesterday. We learned that the cell phone of the shooter was found in his car. It's been taken to Quantico. It is encrypted, so they're having trouble accessing that phone, but they hope to find a way to access and get more information from that. Also, we learned that the shooter came here to this site with his children on Halloween night for a fall festival, and parishioners at the time thought that was a good sign. They were hoping that he had maybe made up with his in-laws, and obviously that did not happen, as a few days later he would return with guns here. And also a third detail, Bill, as I give it back to you, we also now know that he escaped from a mental institution in New Mexico back in 2012. That was the same year he was convicted of spousal abuse and cracking the skull of his infant stepson. Bill?
Some of the survivors have shared stories that'll break your heart. What are you able to piece together now inside that church?
Yeah, Bill, I mean, every time you hear one of these stories or you read them or you hear someone talking about it, it's just heartbreaking. Behind me, actually, is the church. The door's now open here. The flag's still at half staff. The investigation is still going on. The stories that came out from inside are, really a lot of them are heroic. Joanne Ward, for example, she's a mother of 4. And she was inside. She threw herself across the bodies of her children, told them to hide. The shooter shot her, killed 2 of her children, but 2 of them survived. This is just unbelievable. Another woman inside who survived talks about that shooter going around spraying, shooting children, shooting whomever reached for a cell phone. I mean, listen to the details of this woman.
I mean, it was so scary, and that man was shooting. I mean, he was shooting hard, and I could feel the gunshots. I saw them on the carpet because they have carpet in there. I could see the gunshots, you know, coming down.
Unbelievable, Bill. I just talked to the woman down the street who works at the gas station and said bullets were flying by her. And if they give it back to the Sunday school teacher, still gets me too, talking about how the gunman walked up to children and shot children point blank. And as she was holding a woman's hand, the woman was shot 4 times in the torso and died. Bill?
Mike Pence is going to bring them a lot of strength. Our prayers with everybody.
Yeah.
Adam, thanks.
Absolutely.
Adam
Thanks,
Housley back in that story today. Sandra.
President Trump issuing a stern warning for North Korea.
We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction. We will not be intimidated, and we will not let the worst atrocities in history be repeated here on this ground we fought and died so hard to secure.
The president urging responsible nations to unite against North Korea. So are they listening to his message?
Also, the stuff of nightmares here. Terrifying video. A plane catching fire on the runway. We'll tell you how this turned out.
Plus, lawmakers get ready to question Attorney General Jeff Sessions for a 3rd time about campaign contacts with Russia.
You have to remember, in the context of the campaign world, now my memory has been refreshed. With all due respect, there were many other things on my mind that day, other than trying to understand why a volunteer was telling me he may or may not be traveling outside the country.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions heading back to Capitol Hill for another round of questions about contacts with Russia. He's testified twice before that he was unaware of Trump campaign contacts with Russian officials. But that was before the testimony of 2 campaign advisors raised new questions about Sessions' previous testimony. Here's Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, last night.
To the best of my recollection, I don't know Carter Page. When a low-level volunteer decides that they want to take a trip overseas and doesn't report to me or work for the organization, what jurisdiction would I potentially have of telling him or her they can or could not travel overseas? All I was clear about was, if you are going to travel, please do not pretend to be part of the campaign and say that you are part of the campaign, because you are not.
Joining us now, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz is a Fox News contributor and knows all things about this. And the question is, what Jeff Sessions knew, what he did not know. What is likely to come from this?
So it's next Tuesday. It's the House Judiciary Committee, at which I served for the whole time I was in Congress. Yeah. And the Attorney General is going to have a very tough and difficult time, because he's going to get peppered with all things Russia from the Democratic side. You have a 200-plus page transcript now, Carter Page, has been released. You have the Attorney General, their photos, and there are other allegations that the interaction that the Attorney General had was more than what he had originally testified to.
And Republicans are going to press him on what?
Well, Republicans are also a bit frustrated with the Department of Justice. They see an Attorney General who recused himself. Mueller is put in place. But where are the prosecutions on all the other things? The Department of Justice came out and said, we're not going to...
The president's been openly critical.
He did. Right before he got on Air Force One to go overseas, he said he's been unhappy with... I think he was actually in Hawaii, and he said he was unhappy with the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. Didn't want to put his hands on the lever, but you're going to have people like Darrell Issa. Why are we still trying to get Fast and Furious documents? We thought when there was a Republican president, all of this would open. Why are you not prosecuting Lois Lerner? Everything that happened with the IRS, and the IRS apologized. And supposedly there's a monetary payment.
What's the answer to those questions?
I don't know. And I tell you, I went to the White House, I went to the Department of Justice, I sat with the Attorney General for more than an hour, and I was still mystified. I thought that the treasure trove of documents would start to flow. Absolutely not the case. The deep state is very real. I think the Attorney General is having to deal with that. But you're going to have people like Jim Jordan and Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe and Congressman Ted Poe that are going to pepper him with, what is going on with the National Instant Background Checks? You know, this is a problem big more than just the Air Force. You're going to have them say, where are all the Uranium One investigations? How come there's not a special prosecutor? I mean, I could go for another hour.
You're asking questions that I think a lot of people are sitting at home and saying, wait, hey, yeah, where is the Justice Department on all of this? But when it comes to these 2 people, Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, listen to what else Corey Lewandowski had to say about Papadopoulos.
I am very certain that there is no relationship between me as the campaign manager and Donald Trump as the candidate and George Papadopoulos that would have incorporated collusion, cooperation, or coordination with Russia in any way, shape, or form, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, Corey was very specific about his interaction. The problem with that picture is that he's looking at Senator Sessions at the time, and so he was in the room. Now, supposedly they only met once, but you can see where Democrats are going to say, I got a lot of questions I'm going to ask you about that particular meeting and other types of meeting. And it's not just about Papadopoulos. It's also about all these other issues where the Attorney General was very definitive in saying, you know, he did not have these interactions, but there's some documentation that would beg the question if that was fully true.
It sounds to me like you're setting up for some fiery exchanges.
Oh, next Tuesday, I'm telling you, he's going to have no break, because when the Democrats are over there asking about Russia, he's going to have to swivel his head and then start answering questions about the IRS and Fast and Furious and Clinton emails and special prosecutors and Uranium One. There's a lot to go over.
All right, Jason Chaffetz, good to have you on set.
Thank you.
Thank you.
20 past. Democrats now getting a bit of a boost after last night's win in Virginia.
In Virginia, it's going to take a doctor to heal our differences, to bring unity to our people. And I'm here to let you know that the doctor is in.
So now the focus turns to the midterms, and what does last night's victory mean for that? We'll examine it coming up in a moment.
Plus, it's a war of words between lawmakers over the Texas church shooting. Some say thoughts and prayers simply aren't enough. But the vice president says they go a long way.
Right now, I truly believe that covering those families in prayer is making a difference in their lives, and it'll continue to support those families in that community in the days ahead.
We lost two governors' races last night that Democrats typically win. These were in blue states. Virginia's getting bluer and bluer. I think what's very interesting with the Virginia race is that Ralph Northam started running ads saying, I'm going to work with this president. He moderated positions on sanctuary cities and statues, and we started to see him gain traction in rural Virginia.
There is a bit of reaction now. The morning after, Republican Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel last hour on our program here, arguing that the result last night in these governor races, especially Virginia, should not be much of a surprise. Dr. Larry Sabato, Director of Center for Politics, University of Virginia, Charlottesville. Sir, how are you? And good day to you. Okay, you've lined it all up. You've analyzed it all night. What do you think?
Well, she's certainly right that Virginia is becoming bluer. We used to describe Virginia as a purple competitive state, and I'm dropping that. It is now blue state. It's a light blue state. I mean, California, New York, New Jersey, deep blue. So let's make that distinction. But look, here's what happened. Actually, Gillespie did about as well as Trump in percentage terms in rural Virginia. He kept the Trump vote in rural Virginia. He actually got 170,000 more votes than the last Republican candidate for governor. Here's what won it for Northam. He got 335,000 more votes than Terry McAuliffe got 4 years ago. Turnout shot up, but it was mainly Democratic turnout. They were the ones energized this year, just like the Republicans or the Trump Republicans were last year.
So are we reading too much into it? I think when you consider what Kansas, Montana, Georgia, South Carolina, Republicans went 4 for 4, and as you know, the president pointed that out last night in his immediate tweet and real-time reaction to it. Are we trying to see too much into the results, Larry?
Bill, my entire job is reading too much into every single statistic.
Well, give
so,
it another
you're
shot.
trying to take work away from me. Yeah. No, I mean, of course. Look, the next election is a year away. Are there lessons that both parties can draw from this? Obviously. But is this an exact pattern for what's going to happen in 2018? I doubt it. With 365 days to go, and every day seems like a dog day. Yeah. So much happens.
Yes,
no, I think people who are...
Let me show
7
you
years a day.
A little bit of the voter analysis we found here at Fox News. And a lot of this is not going to surprise you. I shared this with Ronna McDaniel last hour. Women, blacks, college degree, all favored the Democratic candidate. Moderates went for him by 26 points. Now, what does that say to Republicans in Congress looking at this, or even the White House?
They have got to find a way, that is Republicans in Congress, they've got to find the path forward that Gillespie couldn't find. He tried. He kept Trump out because he thought that would generate too many additional Democratic votes. But he adopted Trump's policies thinking that would hold the Trump vote. He was right about the latter. He was wrong about the former. So Republicans who are running in competitive territory and light red territory, they have to find a way to energize the Trump voters without activating the Democratic voters who were clearly energized yesterday.
I'll give you two ways you can do that. Get a tax bill that's good for America and repeal and replace Obamacare. And you can clearly run on one, if not both, next November. Last comment.
Yeah. A positive accomplishment would help them. You're absolutely right. Pick one. Okay, if you can't do both, pick one. Then they can talk about it for months, and Republicans would say, hey, it's worth showing up to vote for them.
You can campaign on it. Larry Sabato, thank you, sir. Good to have you back here, okay?
Thanks, Bill.
Out of Virginia.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. You bet. 29 past now. Sandra.
Well, Bill, it could be Judgment Day for Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. Jurors deliberating right now in his bribery trial. We're live from the courthouse.
Also, President Trump, a message that is loud and clear on behalf of the Asian allies and directly aimed at North Korea. Do not underestimate the U.S. of A.
The world cannot tolerate the menace of a rogue regime that threatens with nuclear devastation. All responsible nations must join forces to isolate the brutal regime of North Korea.
President Trump landing in Beijing just a few hours ago, the third stop on his five-nation Asia trip. In a speech last night, President Trump made it clear that North Korea should not underestimate the U.S. and called on two allies to join the U.S. in pressuring the regime to abandon its nuclear program. Greg Palcott is live in London for us. Greg, what more did the president say?
Well, some very strong words, Sandra, about North Korea coming from President Trump. One of my contacts in Seoul told me those words were well received. Now, he packed actually a couple of punches into his address before the South Korean parliament, a big blast against the regime's horrible human rights records, branding the place a hell no person deserves. He also called the regime a cult, but reserved a direct message to the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un regarding its nuclear weapons and its missiles. Take a listen.
The weapons you are acquiring are not making you safer. They are putting your regime in grave danger. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face.
Now, the president said that any attack or attempted attack by North Korea would be fended off by the United States. But interestingly, Sandra, he did offer a diplomatic exit ramp for North Korea if it gives up its nukes.
Greg, any reaction from the North?
Well, from my experience, it's going to take at least another 24 hours or so for the North Korean propaganda machine to crank out a direct response to the speech. But from our time on the ground in North Korea, we can imagine that it's going to be a pretty sharp response. First of all, revered Kim Jong-un and his ancestors, you mess with those folks, you get in trouble. They have denied to me, North Korean officials, that there's any kind of human rights abuses in that country. And they've also told us emphatically that they are not giving up their strategic nuclear weaponry. I guess probably the best sense of what we'll be hearing, Sandra, is what the state news agency said earlier this week, just at the beginning of President Trump's trip. They called him a lunatic old man ready to start a nuclear war. Get ready. Back to you.
All right. Greg Palcott, live for us in London. Thank you.
Let's get analysis so far in this trip. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, Fox News strategic analyst. Quick sound from the last speech. Listen here, Colonel.
Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations. When I say to the North, do not underestimate us, and do not try us.
Very measured tone, statesmanlike, Ralph.
Yes, indeed, and I have to give the president credit. He's behaved himself. He's has been more statesmanlike. He's restrained his impulses. He's stuck to the script. And the speech to the South Korean Parliament was only superficially aimed at Kim Jong-un and North Korea. It was really aimed at South Korea, at Japan, at our allies, and a global audience. So he was portraying the United States as strong, as capable and ready, but also reasonable and anxious for a peaceful solution if one can be found. So overall, his performance in Japan and South Korea, I would say, was very reassuring, not just to us, but to that global audience.
And now into Beijing. Here's what I thought the strongest line was, Ralph. The weight of this crisis is on your conscience. That's a quote. Now's the hard part. What happens in Beijing? Exactly right.
To a degree, Japan and South Korea were low-hanging fruit. Just had to stick to the script. The Chinese are good. President Xi is a really tough and unscrupulous negotiator. The Chinese have a playbook. It's already unfolding, where they announced at least $9 billion in deals with U.S. corporations to make us feel good about things and distract us from Chinese intellectual property theft, the cost of which is vastly greater, Chinese dumping, Chinese trade cheating, and of course, a lack of sufficient and efficient help with North Korea. So the real challenge for our president and the real challenge for his art of the deal approach to the world is first Beijing and President Xi, and then he's meeting with President Putin in Vietnam a few days later, and that's also thin ice, both because of the Russian investigation back here, but also Putin's been doing this for 2 decades. He really knows the ropes. He reads his briefing books, as does President Xi. So our president is coming up against 2 very formidable opponents, and we're just going to have to watch that one and see what unfolds.
Here's what is obvious to me. He's not afraid to call these people out, whether it was NATO several months ago or whether it was in this speech here on Russia and China. He said the following.
We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions.
Went on to say downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime and several all ties of trade and technology.
Yeah,
you mentioned Putin. Just peel back the curtain here, Ralph. What's the challenge during that meeting in Vietnam?
Well, the challenge is Putin making an offer that sounds really good. Same problem with Xi. They make offers that sound really good. We sucker for them, and nothing changes or it gets worse for us. And, you know, I feel that the president actually has been reluctant to really call out China, but especially with Putin. He is still, after a year in office, he has still not challenged Putin by name on any substantial issue. And, you know, that does give me some cause for concern. But the bottom line is this.
13-day trip. 13-day trip, Ralph.
Exhausting and tiring.
Clearly, this is a priority. I'll give you the last comment on that trip.
Well, he's our president, and every American should hope that he succeeds.
Thank you, Ralph. Talk again real soon, okay? Ralph Peters there, the Colonel in Washington. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Vice President Mike Pence heading to Texas just hours from now to console that small community. All this, as some Democrats say, thoughts and prayers are not enough. The Vice President disagrees. Our panel takes this one up.
It takes nothing away from our determination to get to the bottom of what happened, to understand the why, to determine whether or not there were errors along the way.
Fiery scene on the runway, Seattle Airport last night. Look at the cell phone video outside the window. Airbus 330 just landing, one of the engines bursting into flames. Get me out of there. No passengers on board. Well, that's okay. That's all right. The airport crew, they're all right. They put out the flames before the firefighters arrived, and no one was injured. That's a good crew to have, right? Whoa. I mean, if the crew's going to put out the flames.
No one was hurt.
Climb on board.
Thankful for that.
Yes.
I'm a believer, and I believe in prayer. And I know that at this moment of such heartbreak and loss in that community, that what most Americans are most able to do is to pray for those families.
Vice President Pence speaking out in support of offering thoughts and prayers in the wake of this tragedy after some lawmakers on the left slammed Republicans for not doing enough when it comes to gun control. Now the Senate Judiciary Committee ranking member Dianne Feinstein will call for a hearing following the church massacre. Let's discuss it with former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth and Democratic strategist Brad Woodhouse, former communications director for the DNC. Good morning to both of you.
Thank you,
Congresswoman, it's really hard for some of us to understand and even fathom those that want to attack prayer in the days that followed this horrific tragedy that played out Sunday morning.
Right. And Sandra, I think most Americans by far would say that the value of prayer and the value of faith and the value of personal faith and faith in communities is only a good thing. It is an unalloyed good. And having said that, I think it's wrong to assail prayer in every respect. I do think it is certainly time as well, always as a nation, to contemplate how we can protect the innocent, how we can prevent these sorts of horrific crimes, these acts of madness, whenever we can. And in that regard, I think it's appropriate for all of us to seek not to be divisive, but to be inclusive and to be thoughtful.
It does
about
feel
how
like
we do
it
this.
does feel like it got political very quickly in the hours that followed this attack. Brad, I saw you shaking your head, but I want to first, before we get your reaction, share with you William McGurn's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, former speechwriter for George W. Bush. He put his thoughts into these words. Over the next few weeks, the surviving members of the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs will wrap their fallen in love and lay them to rest. What these survivors may individually believe about gun control is anyone's guess, but it's hard to believe that the way to their hearts is by mocking offers of prayer, even from Republicans. Brad?
Well, look, this is not about mocking offers of prayer. And look, if thoughts and prayers are a moral virtue, a moral failure is Republicans who would rather represent the interests of the NRA than do something to prevent these tragedies. It's not about offering thoughts and prayers. That's fine. Barack Obama offered thoughts and prayers after this latest tragedy. But he also went on to say that more needs to be done to prevent these tragedies. Why not thoughts and prayers and ban bump stocks?
Well, just so you know,
that
is being discussed now, Brad. That is being discussed. And when you say that it's not mocking, I think some people would respond by saying there are some tweets and some of those thoughts and mockings that I wouldn't even be comfortable putting on the screen right now, coming from the likes of celebrities and others that were extremely harsh.
Look, but again, after every one of these tragedies that's done, domestic terrorism, Republicans come with thoughts and prayers, and then they say, we can't talk about anything else.
Okay, so let's talk about what is being discussed about being done. So we've already got...
Hold on.
I want to get the Congresswoman back in here, because what we do know now is that Chuck Grassley has confirmed, and his office has announced that they will be holding this hearing in 1 week. Firearm accessory regulation, of course, that's addressing the bump stock issue, and enforcing federal and state reporting to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, known as the NICS. All right, there seems to be agreement on the bump stocks, Congresswoman. Tell me if I'm wrong, on both sides of the aisle. We heard that following the Las Vegas shooting on the bump stocks. As far as the reporting is concerned, Jeff Flake, a Republican, says he's working on legislation to require the military report domestic violence convictions to the National Background Check System. Brad, I'm hearing Republicans, maybe it's a few days later, but they are trying to address some of the issues they see here. Congresswoman?
Yes, I agree with you, Sandra. I think if we can come to agreement about certain ways in which we can try to convert these events into far less dangerous ones, that's perfectly valid. But we have to look at the criminals themselves. We have to look at a man like this one who clearly had a deranged mind and hideous intents that had been obvious. And in fact, the Air Force, as we know, failed to report, as they were required to do by Air Force protocol, at the very least, that this man was involved in a hideous act of domestic abuse in which he cracked his stepson's skull and should never have had access to firearms. firearms. And these are the very challenging conversations that we have to have, because it's not firearms per se that are dangerous. It is the people who have access to them and use them for this kind of intent. And in fact, this man was stopped by a good man who had a firearm as well.
So, Brad, you know, what we're hearing is calls for laws on rules that already exist. The Air Force has already said multiple times right here on this network, they dropped the ball. They didn't report what they had an agreement to report that would have restricted a man like that from acquiring and purchasing a gun.
Well, yeah, and that's important, and they need to correct that. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. Look, we're weeks after the Las Vegas tragedy, and we're having a hearing on bump stocks. You know, Republicans came out and said, you know, we should look at bump stocks. The NRA said we should look at bump stocks. We're having a hearing on it. Why not go to the floor? They didn't hold a hearing in the House on their health care bill. Why not go to the floor with a bill to ban bump stocks?
All right. We told you it was going to be a debate. It was a debate. Congresswoman Brad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, John Scott's coming up next. Happening now, rolling your way just in a couple of minutes. John, how are you?
Good morning, Bill. Good morning to you. Democrats win big in Virginia and New Jersey. What does it mean for the Republican agenda and next year's midterm elections? Also, President Trump warns North Korea not to test the United States. We will talk about that message and the president's effectiveness so far on his trip through Asia. Coming up, happening now.
John, see you in 10 minutes, top of the hour.
Thank you.
Jury now, another day of deliberations. Democratic Senator Bob Menendez awaiting his fate. What a juror asked the judge and why that request has been
saying goodbye to its 747 jets. Last night, the airline company held a ceremonial final flight for its last 747, taking off from San Francisco and landing in Honolulu. The 747 debuted in 1968, changing air travel as we know it, handling longer trips and holding more people. But now, as we know, planes have become much more efficient. The Dreamliner comes to mind, the 787. So it was time to retire those massive planes. Bill Hemmer, you probably spent a few minutes on a 747.
Yeah, I've never been up top, though. It's like one of those things that you, shucks, missed out.
You missed out?
Yes, I did. All right, now let's go to New Jersey. That's with the trial and the bribery trial of Democratic Senator Bob Menendez deliberating now with the jury, the judge denying a request from a juror for a readback of a portion of the closing arguments. But what was that all about? Rick Leventhal back on that story live in District Court, New Jersey. And what was the question, Rick? Good morning.
Well, Bill, it definitely raised some eyebrows in the courtroom yesterday afternoon. The juror wanted to know what the defense definition of a U.S. senator was. And it sounded pretty simple, but it really wasn't. What the juror wanted was readback of the defense closing arguments when he talked about the official acts that Menendez could have carried out on behalf of his friend. But as the judge pointed out, closing arguments are not considered evidence. He said no to the readback, and deliberations continue here this morning. Now, week 10 of this corruption trial of the second-term Democratic senator from New Jersey who faces several counts of bribery and fraud and one charge of making false statements on congressional disclosure forms. He's been tried along with his co-defendant, wealthy Florida eye doctor Solomon Melgen, who's already convicted of Medicare fraud, now accused of showering Menendez with expensive vacations and rides on his private jet and hundreds of thousands of dollars in political contributions in exchange for favors and intervention in contract disputes. Well, the defense calls the case absurd. They say that the two men are just very good friends, and the senator remained publicly confident but tight-lipped yesterday afternoon. Trial keeping you up at night?
I have nothing more to say. Looking forward to the jury.
The charges against him have a range of penalties up to 20 years in prison, Bill.
If a conviction is given, what happens to his time in the Senate there, Rick?
Well, he hasn't said if he resigned, he would almost certainly appeal. And even a convicted felon can serve in the U.S. Senate, Bill. If the Senate wanted to try and kick him out, they could vote on it, but that requires a two-thirds majority vote in the U.S. Senate, and that seems unlikely given the political climate. And if he were convicted and he appealed, he could still run for re-election next year, Bill.
Wow, very interesting. Rick, thanks on Jury Watch there in New Jersey. Thank you, sir. Sandra.
Voters sending a message in swing state Virginia, casting their ballots for Democrats. What the results say about Trumpism going forward.